the reality is there's tons of different roles in any organization, whether it's in an operating room, a hospital, ambulatory care center. There's so many different positions within that system that you can grow in many different ways, not just by becoming the head of it.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
This week on First Case, we speak with Jamie Terran, Certified Career Coach at Jamie Terran Coaching and the VP of Marketing and Education at Propper Manufacturing. And we are kicking off Season 6. And our theme this season is success in scrubs. And so no better place to start than with Jamie, who is a Certified Career Coach, and she's going to talk to us about professional development today. We're going to define it and set the table for the entire season.
I'm so excited. Jamie Terran just knows all things professional development. And when I've listened to her in Beyond Clean conferences that she's done and some of the education she's provided or seen her comments and posts on LinkedIn, she just oozes this stuff. I mean, she's a career coach, so she should. But I think it's a great place to start to really define professional development. And it's really something I think different than how most of us in healthcare see it. And so I'm excited to get her to break it down for us.
All right, we're going to be right back after a short break with Jamie Terran, Certified Career Coach at Jamie Terran Coaching and VP of Marketing and Education at Propper Manufacturing after a short break.
I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Jamie Terran, Certified Career Coach at Jamie Terran Coaching and the VP of Marketing and Education at Propper Manufacturing. And we are kicking off Season 6 with you, Jamie. It's all about success in scrubs, and we are going to do this in style. We are going to, at the outset, define professional development, which is really going to be a theme that is tied in throughout the entire season. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited when Melanie said that you're going to have a whole season about professional development. And man, I've been thinking about how in the world to define this ever since our first conversation. So I hope I can find a way to do it justice, and really excited about the conversation with you both today.
We have somebody else that we're going to be speaking with this season, Brooke Elliott, who actually is contributing to another one of our podcast brands in healthcare supply chain called Power Supply. And she does a lot of videos. And I actually forgot how we all got introduced until you and I hopped in here, and you reminded me that you introduced us to Brooke Elliott. So it's kind of a, in some ways, small world, the career coaches that are out there. But I can tell you, I've done a few other interviews, again, for some of the other brands on this, but more as isolated conversations versus an entire themed season on it. This area is so underutilized in healthcare, and especially in the nursing world. And it's really going to tee up nicely today. And Melanie, I'm sure you'll echo my thoughts here, but we go to nursing school, we do, great things. We come out, we might be an all-star, and then all of a sudden we're promoted into management. And we may have never fostered or developed the skill set that it requires to be a manager, even though we might have been, an all-star nurse on the front lines. And so I like to set the table a little bit, just kind of saying, all of us need help in developing professional growth because new things are required of us as we experience new roles and responsibilities throughout our career. And so why don't we talk about your development in that same context? How did you develop professionally, and talk about your path and your background?
Wow, my journey. So how did I get to this call today? First, it started out with a bunch of failure. I thought I was going to be a doctor by now. It was the only path that I had seen for myself until I was 25 years old and realized it wasn't the path for me anymore. From there, a lot of crazy things happened, took me around the country working for a bunch of different companies, but really led me to finding education and training, especially in the professional development space, which is a space that I absolutely love. And I've been so proud of the work that we've done at Propper Academy, where we've been able to create continuing education-based content in the professional development space. And it's sort of a weird overlap because people think continuing education is professional development, but it's so much more than that. And I love that you started out by saying that like Brooke, Elliott, and I have this connection because if you are a woman in healthcare right now, if you can do one thing for yourself and you stop listening to this podcast right now, it's join Professional Women in Healthcare, which is how we met. But we have lots more to talk about, so I hope you don't actually stop the podcast right now. But amazing organization. So I'm so glad that I've had the chance to shout them out so early in our conversation.
Well, okay. So a few months ago, I was hosting a Beyond Clean conference, and that is how you and I got to meet. And you were actually going through some incredibly good professional development topics and really talking about these things. And I was just forming this idea that I wanted to tackle professional development for an entire season. And so after I met you and when I really hammered out this topic, I was like, of course we're going to talk to Jamie Terran. And I want to talk to her first because she knows this stuff and we really need to set the table for what we're talking about. And I like what you said. It's more than just CEs. It's more than just getting those continuing education points so that you can renew your license, but defining what that is. Like I said, setting the table for this greater theme for the whole season. How would you define what professional development is?
I define professional development as anything that leads to growth, which, spoiler, is anything. So like I said in my kind of introduction of how did I get here, it started out with failure. But that failure was essential to my ultimate success, to my being here today. And it's kind of, I say it in jest that it was failure because it was just a winding road and a series of decisions. It would have been viewed as failure to my 17-year-old self, but now I just see it as steps in the journey. So it's so much more than those credits, like we've said. It's every conversation you have with someone in the field. It's every book you read, every article, heck, every LinkedIn post, of course, every podcast, but every opportunity that you have to gain a little bit more information, plus the courses, plus the conferences, plus the professional organizations. We think of the formal stuff first, but a lot of the time, and I'm guessing both of you would have experiences that prove this statement true, it's the people and the small things that you've done in your career that lead to the biggest changes. I mean, certainly, Justin, I think we're here because of people that you met over your career. And Melanie, I'm sure the same.
Yeah, networking for sure. And I think what you're talking about and what you're touching on is this idea that you and I talked about growth mindset and having this. Well, I don't want to explain it because you do such a better job than me, but let's talk about growth mindset and how really that leads to this anything that can be professional development.
Yeah, absolutely. A growth mindset is simply the belief that there's always more for you, that there's nothing permanently holding you back. There's amazing books that can go into much greater detail. I'm sure we can link to Carol Dweck's book, which is really the book on the growth mindset. But it's the headset that every opportunity is a chance to grow and learn, rather than a limiting mindset, which is the feeling that there's some sort of cap on your development or your growth potential. So a lot of the time people have this feeling about basic things we learn in school. Math often hits home for people. A lot of people have limiting mindsets about math. We've all been scarred. Or you love it, right? Like one of the two. But a lot of people have been burned by some math teacher that assumed they could only understand so much math. And I use that example because it's so emotional. Like I saw both of you kind of just like your faces changed.
Well, I was just going to say on the math thing, like here's what's interesting about growth, right? And maybe you can build on this too a little bit. You know, I loved math in high school, but part of the reason I loved it is because I was in high school and I didn't have to try in math. It made sense to me.
There you go.
And I wanted, you know, the easier class. And so I did great. And then I thought, oh, I'm so good at math. I'm naturally inclined. And I went off to school to be a chemical engineer. And I got a 10 on my first chemistry test, and I could barely eke by with a C+ in calculus, and I had to get a tutor midway through the second semester just to survive calculus. And I thought, what's happening? I'm so good at math. And, you know, that's when I switched my degree to nursing, because what I really realized was the engineering degree wasn't for me because I didn't get excited by math. And so that's the reason I didn't grow, is because that wasn't an area I actually had interest in. It's just an area I thought I had an aptitude in. But aptitude only takes you so far if you don't have interest in continuing to kind of pursue that. And I absolutely love the math analogy because I think it works both ways that you presented it and in this kind of other somewhat ironic path as well. And I realized, do I really want to be in front of a computer pushing equations, or do I want to be around people? And I literally went from an engineering degree to a nursing degree.
Justin, thank you for explaining to me what, like, your experience with math and how that is just such a perfect example. There are people who think they have this aptitude and then they just get stuck. And you could have seen that situation as limiting to everything else in your life. Because a lot of the time people with limiting mindsets really expand on that feeling and they let it hold them back overall. It's not usually limited to just one small field in high school. Where the growth mindset, for someone with a growth mindset would approach their actions, they might have seen this as a challenge that they were going to overcome and keep investing. But then they'd have to ask themselves, were they investing in the right space at a point where they realized their development wasn't there anymore? So I love math because everyone does have these really strong emotions tied to it. Like for you, you thought you were a math rock star until you were not a math rock star. And other people might have had the experience where they were just believing from such a young age they could not grow with it. And it just was so limited that they never even got to the point of having the opportunity to change their career path and find the one that was really suited for them because they didn't have the confidence or the growth mindset to take it to that next level.
So you've been talking about growth mindset and you're also talking about limiting mindset. And I think something that we see in nursing, with our surgical techs, with everyone in the operating room and in healthcare is another limiting mindset that's not negative, but it's this limiting mindset that professional development and growth, my goal must be leadership. I must be looking to be in management if I want to do professional development. Otherwise it's not pertinent or it's not necessary. But that's not really true, is it?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it couldn't possibly be true because we can look around the world and see people successful at every different stage in their lives and in all different roles. Just the three of us have extremely different paths. We have extremely different careers right now, but we've all found success for where we are now, and those goals will change in the future. So the first thing I'll say is if leadership is not your goal right now, that's totally fine. It could be in the future or it may not be. And if you're at a stage in your career where you're absolutely in love with what you're doing, or you absolutely hate what you're doing and you just don't want to be your boss, that is totally fine too. Part of professional development is knowing and identifying what it is that you want to grow in. And if you're at a point in your life where growth is the goal, which is probably a whole podcast to itself, but as someone with a 1-year-old, I've had a lot of conversations with myself over the past year about what I'm looking for right now professionally and what I have time for right now professionally and what's realistic for now. And remembering that I do have my whole future ahead of me for whatever steps may appear. And you have the same. No matter where you are in your career, if you have a 1-year-old or an 18-year-old, or you never want to have a child ever in your life, there is no one goal that is suitable for everyone.
You're so right. We all have seasons of life. We are all in different seasons, and different seasons bring different struggles. They bring different challenges, and they bring different victories. But our growth is not going to look the same throughout every one of those seasons. And it would be crazy for us to expect the same results from everyone because of the different seasons of life they might be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And the truth is that not everyone can be a manager or a leader of their department, which is not to say if you want to, that you don't have the opportunity to. If that's your goal, then you should set out to attain that goal. But the reality is there's tons of different roles in any organization, whether it's in an operating room, a hospital, a ambulatory care center. There's so many different positions within that system that you can grow in many different ways, not just by becoming the head of it.
I also want to kind of tie that into expectations, right? Because I feel like sometimes, and this can be born out of, family dynamics, really, that just like starts from the beginning, that there's expectations in a family culture about this is what success looks like. These are the expectations. This is how your life should map out. And unfortunately, I think those sometimes can be the most subversive and unconscious. And you don't even realize that they're playing out sometimes. And then, I think to Melanie's point about different seasons of life, they may become apparent to you, right? And then you kind of like blossom and you have this like moment of epiphany, and then growth comes out of that. But, in your coaching career, how often do you run into that with people where they've kind of subscribed to this, and it may not be family, it could be peer group. I mean, it happens in high school too, when you're forming peer groups and you're kind of like everybody is, getting into little social circles that have like expectations tied to that too, regardless of what the family culture is that they're coming from. How often do those limit people's professional lives?
Oh, I mean, I think personally, professionally, in every which way, we all know people who made a career choice that maybe the goal belonged to somebody else. It happens. And some people are very happy with that outcome. And some people just find themselves feeling lost or unsure. I think also a lot of people honor the person they were when they were 18 for their entire lives. And so you might be listening to this and saying, oh yeah, my family never really had any particular expectations, but you did. And you're honoring that 18-year-old who made a decision to go to school, who Justin would have been if he had aced that math test in college. And you might be realizing that now who you are at whatever age or life state that you're in, sitting listening to this, that no longer honors who you are as a person now. And so I think that that's something that I see maybe even more. People who are saying, well, I studied this in college, or I got this certificate and I invested all this time, so I may as well keep going. But in fact, that is a very limiting mindset. There's always opportunity, which brings me to something that I think everyone I've ever spoken to about professional development has heard me say, which is the least important part of professional development is more costly education. There's so much pressure or so many thoughts. Well, if I just go back to school, then I will have this new career path. And there's so many reasons why it is not necessary in many situations. Granted, if you're looking to become a doctor, or you're listening to this and debating becoming a nurse, there are certain realities to making those decisions. But the first step is rarely going and getting an expensive degree in a career change type situation.
So along those lines, one thing that you and I talked about when we talked about this episode beforehand, you mentioned something about professional growth not always being linear, not always being upward, making that next step, that next degree, that next position. Can you go into that a little bit and talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we all look back at our careers, we can see that there were times that we had changes that weren't perfect, weren't exactly what we wanted, or maybe even you're someone who has what I call somersaulted through your career. You picked something and you just took the next thing that came along and the next thing came along. And you've been very fortunate that someone saw that you were awesome, but it was never really what you were choosing to do. And so in both of those cases, it's important to reflect back on how you got to where you are now when you start to think about your next goals, and to realize that the goal you have that comes to mind right away, I should say, may be a lot bigger than the steps that you're going to take to reach that goal. So thinking about how you can get to where you're going to go, and that it may not be a perfect straight line. And in fact, I would be quite surprised if it was a perfect straight line, because we all have different paths and we all have different ways that we've gotten into the position that we're working toward, that we will be one day, that we're working towards, and that we're in right now.
So 2 things I heard you just say, and one was rarely the first step is to go, spend a lot of money on a degree. And then you just talked about there's plenty of nonlinear paths and there are certain steps. And so I kind of wonder, what is a good first step, whether it's a career change or, I guess I got to think that there's just an exploratory phase that makes so much more sense for everybody. I explored that engineering degree and I learned quickly it wasn't for me, right? So I'd already invested, a year's worth of CE credits that did not transfer to my nursing curriculum, except I think I used physics and calculus as electives instead of astronomy and something fun. And so, I'm thinking about what you're saying. I'm like, so what does that exploratory phase look like? And how can people take that first step without making a financial commitment, without even making their own personal commitment? Because that was the other trap door I heard you say. I made this decision when I was 18, and that decision doesn't have to be an expensive degree. It was just a mental decision that they committed themselves to a path that no longer fits. So what's that first step look like? And can we take some pressure off of everybody who is starting to consider that and feels immediately overwhelmed by it?
Yes, absolutely. Your next step is to open your web browser and log into LinkedIn and find somebody who is doing what you think you might want to do. And that is so essential because of what I just said, what you think you want to do. So there are surprises in every job. That's inevitable. There are surprises in life, things we don't anticipate. But there's a lot that we can learn before through other people's experiences. And if we take the example of leadership, there's many pros and many cons to being a leader of any organization, of any OR, of any hospital system. And to have an idea of what those may be will help you make an educated decision on the next steps that you're taking. Now, of course, that's super oversimplified, and I made it sound like it would be very easy to have that conversation. But the good thing is that we have a tool like LinkedIn, that you have colleagues, you have people in your lives, you have Facebook, whatever your social media tool of choice is. And to just frankly ask people, which of course does require that you know what the goal is or what you might want to do. But when you approach this with an honest ask, saying where you are in your career, what has brought you to this conversation that you're having with this other individual or trying to have with this other individual, you have an opportunity for a frank conversation, and it can be much less pressure filled than if you're at the point where you're actively applying for this job. And you can get information that will help you to understand if it's a job you even want before you're there. And that will save you a ton of time and emotional energy.
What you're talking about is the all-important networking and the beauty of LinkedIn, the beauty of professional organizations and places where we can find people that we can connect with and then ultimately, hopefully find a mentor in. I know you and I talked extensively about the value and benefit of mentors and networking when we were talking prior to the show. And I think that's really a concept that might get overlooked in professional development and how networking and how having a mentor really can help us grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Stella, was going to be talking about some professional organizations in one of the episodes coming up, and that will be so important. But something that I see a lot of professionals doing is going to conferences for professional organizations for the credits. Yes, also for the social aspects, but I think that aspect of real professional networking, meeting other people that are in your space, understanding what they're doing differently than maybe you're doing, what, exchange of information is so essential to meet people that even are just outside of your facility, outside of where you're working, outside of your geographic area. They're going to be doing things differently, exposure to different things, can give different types of advice.
Yeah, and actually it's funny that you bring Stella up because I met Stella at AORN earlier this year. And yeah, it was great to just get to know her, but the networking and now connection that I have with her, she sent me, hey, why don't y'all look into this? Hey, why don't y'all talk about that? I really want to know about X, Y, or Z. And it's been great to have the eyes and ears of somebody completely across the country for me that can help me grow. I'm learning something as she's asking me about these topics. And then we're also able to dive into those conversations and have them. But it's all because we went to AORN. Yeah, I got some CEs by going to some lectures, but what I really got were some really cool connections with people that I'm still in touch with today. And I don't think you can put a price tag on that connection at all.
Absolutely. And as we're chatting, I'm just thinking about the person who's a real introvert who's thinking, oh my God, I could never grow because I can't have this conversation, or the person who's working double shifts and like, I'm so busy, I can't possibly, get on social media and do anything other than just watch people dancing on TikTok. And so what I'm going to solve your problem by volunteering everyone on this podcast for a little assignment. And that is to say, if you know there's something that you're looking for that you don't know enough about, or you're not sure who to talk to about it, I think between the three of us, we'll certainly do everything we can to help you have that first conversation. And that is how you build your network. Taking one offer, taking the opportunity. And I know personally a bunch of the people that are coming up in future podcasts, I'll volunteer them too. I think everyone who's going to be speaking with you this season is amazing, and they're all joining because they care about professional development. And so there you go. You have a bunch of people that you can reach out to ask a question to.
100% agree. Happy to connect to anybody that I know or ask some questions. If anybody wants to get in touch with any one of us, we will certainly put you in the right direction of who we know who can help. But the other thing I want to talk to you about too is something that you brought up that I had not thought about before. And it's this idea of morality when it comes to the decisions we make with professional development and maybe those internal or external judgments that come along with it. Talk about morality and talk about that process for me.
Yeah. So I feel like it kind of came up in our prep session at a similar stage where we were like, what about all the people that are really happy where they are and they just want to learn a little bit more? And they're content.
Right.
They're content with their situation and they don't need a credit right now. They're really busy. That is awesome. Good for you. Kudos. You got to where we all want to be. So keeping in mind that, yes, you want a growth mindset, because a growth mindset is the difference between, let's be blunt, the surgeon in the room checking an instrument because it was the wrong instrument and you just shutting down and it really, taking a lot away from you as a professional, and you laughing about that story with your, work BFFs later on. It's what helps you get through the day and see every opportunity to learn. Maybe not in the moment if your sterile instrument just got thrown on the floor. But it's totally great to not necessarily have a big picture goal right now, or to have any professional goal right now. You might have personal goals. You might just be happy with where you are. But I think that a lot of the time in a world where we have so many, especially companies, Propper as well, we want you to come to our courses at Propper Academy. We know that they're valuable and we're excited about them, but all these different companies that are serving content, they make it seem as if that's what you should be doing. And the reality is that, like we said earlier, there's a season for everything in life. And if you tuned into this because you love Melanie and you know that the past podcasts are awesome and you're just curious, but you're not really at a stage where growth is on your mind, kudos to you. You're doing everything right for you. There is nothing that's right for everybody.
I totally agree. It takes a lot of the pressure off when you think about it in that sense. It's like my growth mindset. I'm doing something that's going to help me grow. But if maybe that's just listening to a podcast. Maybe later on it's doing something more, or maybe it's doing what I have to do when I have to get things done. But maybe I'm not interested in anything else. But that's okay too. And realizing that we're all in different places is something I don't think I'd given enough thought to before we talked.
Yeah, and I think something that's really cool about working in a hospital, working in an OR, is that you'd be hard pressed to have a day where you don't learn something. No two patients are the same. No two trays are the same. There's always going to be an opportunity to learn and grow and expose yourself to something. So even if it doesn't come in one of these formal means, even if you're not traveling to some conference coming up or anything like that, you are growing as an individual as long as you take in that new information and make good of it.
I hear about it all the time, or I hear people, especially young professionals, all the time. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I want to do. And they put a lot of pressure on themselves at the same time, which kind of creates this paralysis at the same time that, to your point, if you don't know what you want to do, then the opportunity is to do anything. And they actually go the other way with it. And they denigrate themselves for not knowing what they want to do in some respect. And so I love your very clear message. Talk to people if you think you might be interested in what they're interested in. Listen to podcasts. Just find that out, because the more information you take in and the more you hear other people talk about things that you haven't been exposed to, the quicker you might decide that's something I could latch on to. And I just love that the small little bits can take you very far, messaging that's in here, because that's what creates real action. Jamie, this was a phenomenal interview. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. To your point, taking the attitude, this very cliched attitude, if it's not a heck yes, it's a no, can get you pretty far in professional development and growth.
That was Jamie Terran, certified career coach at Jamie Terran Coaching and the VP of Marketing and Education at Propper Manufacturing. And Melanie, what a great way to kick off this season and really talk about professional development and defining it and all of its possibilities, because that's the one thing I heard loud and clear from Jamie. And, I think of that old saying, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And in so many ways, Fear is what kind of limits those possibilities. A lot of times it's because we're like, oh, I have to go make this huge commitment to move forward. And, as we were saying when we wrapped up, what I love about this is it's more focused on the exploration and the personal exploration and letting that kind of lead the path that is not a linear path. And you may go off on a little side path and find that it's a dead end and come back and then continue down the main path again, which is, really what your life is going to be or is or could be as you continue that exploration process. And so I'm all about opportunities. I definitely didn't take a very linear path to podcasting. I can tell you that. And I'm always glass half full. And I love that mentality. And I love how she just said, get onto LinkedIn and start talking to people that do what you think you might like to do.
Yeah, there's just so many opportunities, and to break free from the mindset that professional development equals continuing education, because we are more than just our CE credits, and our professional growth is so much more involved. And one of the things that struck me when she was talking about growth mindset was actually the opposite, was limiting mindset. And I remember vividly being in the OR one day with finishing up a case, and one of the fifth-year residents was talking about his career path, and we were talking about where he was going for his fellowship. But he made the comment that he didn't even want to be a surgeon. He had been forced to go to medical school because that was the family tradition and the expectation. And so he did. And here he was 5 years into residency, and he still wasn't happy. And so I asked him, I said, well, if you could do whatever you wanted, what would you do? And he said, I'd be a football coach. But football coach wasn't the expectation from his family. It was surgeon. And so here he was doing something because it was expected of him, rather than really what he was truly passionate about. And I think while all of us maybe haven't gone to medical school and become trained surgeons when we didn't want to, we have all found ourselves doing things that because they're expected of us, and it's not really what we're passionate about or what we want to do. And the beauty of the growth mindset is that we can explore our passions, and then we can pursue those in a way that works for us and in a way that maybe isn't linear, but it's the path that we need to take to find out what we want to do.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that you chose to tell a story that a surgeon wished he was a coach.
Right?
When we're talking about professional development with a career coach today. I just think that's a great way to bookend today's episode. And really great job, Jamie. Thanks for helping us kick this off. We've got tons of interviews coming up to build off of this conversation. It's kind of part of our move with theming these seasons. And so, I'm excited to dive into some of the elements of professional development in so many different ways and all of their nuances. And so Jamie did an awesome job. I do want to remind everybody that you can support First Case by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. But if you don't like those apps, then find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or Spotify. And if none of those really appeal to you, whichever podcast application you prefer, just search for the First Case podcast. But my favorite way, honestly, Melanie, is to download our smartphone app for iPhone or Android, because you'll definitely see all of the episodes. You'll be able to search and filter by topics that you might be interested in, especially now that we have this very broad library. And the other thing is we have bonus content. So for some of these episodes, you click on that gift box that's associated with the episode when you open it up in our smartphone app, and you'll find extra content in there that you can take a look at as well. While you're there downloading the smartphone app, we'd love a rating and a review, because we love to hear from you and see that you like what we're putting out there. And speaking of feedback, you can send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com if you have suggestions for guests or topics, maybe themes for future seasons. We'd love to hear from you, even if it's just general feedback on the show itself. On behalf of Melanie and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of First Case.